What if I told you that the moment a narcissist loses you, their biggest fear isn't heartbreak, it's becoming irrelevant? The person who acted like they never needed you may secretly go through a psychological spiral they would never want anyone to witness. Today, we're breaking down the 6 psychological stages a narcissist often experiences after losing someone they believed would never walk away. And stage number 5 is where many people get pulled right back into the cycle without even realizing what's happening. Have you ever noticed that someone suddenly became obsessed with you only after you walked away? If you've lived through that, stay with me, because what happens after a narcissist loses control can reveal more about them than years of being in a relationship with them ever could. When people think about a breakup, they usually picture sadness, grief, and longing. But for a narcissistic person, the process is typically less about losing a relationship and more about losing a source of validation, admiration, attention, and control. The first psychological stage a narcissist often goes through after losing someone is shock and disbelief. This reaction can seem surprising because many narcissistic individuals project an image of confidence, independence, and emotional unbreakability. But beneath that exterior is often a deep reliance on external validation, admiration, and a sense of control over the people in their lives. When someone they believed would always stay available suddenly leaves, it shatters the reality they have constructed for themselves. Instead of immediately accepting the loss, their mind may resist it. They often struggle to believe that the relationship is truly finished because doing so would require acknowledging that another person made a choice completely outside of their influence. During this stage, they may convince themselves that the separation is only temporary or that the other person is simply acting out of emotion and will eventually come back. They replay conversations, search for explanations that protect their self-image, and dismiss any evidence that the relationship has genuinely ended. The loss is not experienced simply as the absence of a partner, friend, or family member. It is experienced as a direct challenge to their perceived authority and importance. They may think, how could they leave me, rather than why did the relationship fail? This distinction matters because the focus stays centered on themselves instead of on the shared dynamics of the relationship. The disbelief serves as a psychological defense mechanism, temporarily shielding them from feelings of rejection, vulnerability, and powerlessness. Rather than facing the emotional reality of being left, they remain trapped in the assumption that they can still influence the outcome and restore the situation on their own terms. After the initial shock begins to fade, a narcissist often experiences what is known as a narcissistic injury. This is not simply emotional pain the way most people experience heartbreak. Instead, it is a profound blow to the self-image they have worked hard to maintain. Many narcissistic individuals rely heavily on external validation to support their sense of worth. They may appear confident, successful, desirable, or superior, but much of that confidence depends on receiving admiration, attention, and affirmation from others. When someone chooses to leave them, especially after they believe they had secured that person's loyalty, it creates a direct challenge to their perception of themselves. The departure forces them to confront a reality they would rather avoid. They were not able to maintain the influence, admiration, or control they expected. This realization can trigger intense feelings of humiliation, shame, insecurity, and resentment. However, these emotions are often difficult for them to acknowledge openly because doing so would expose vulnerabilities they have spent years trying to hide. Instead, the emotional wound may be expressed through defensiveness, anger, blame, or attempts to discredit the person who left. Rather than reflecting on their own behavior, they may become preoccupied with protecting their ego from further damage. Their thoughts often revolve around questions such as why someone would reject them, how others might view the situation, and what the law says about their status or desirability. The pain is deeply tied to identity because the breakup threatens the carefully crafted image they present to themselves and the world. If you're finding these stages eye-opening, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Understanding these patterns isn't about obsessing over what a narcissist is doing. It's about gaining clarity so you can recognize unhealthy dynamics and protect your own emotional well-being. The third psychological stage often involves a strong focus on image protection. After experiencing the blow of a narcissistic injury, the narcissist becomes increasingly concerned with how the breakup or loss is perceived by others. For many narcissistic individuals, their public image is closely connected to their sense of self-worth. They invest significant energy into maintaining an appearance of success, desirability, competence, or superiority. When someone leaves them, That carefully managed image can feel threatened not only in their own eyes, but also in the eyes of friends, family, colleagues, and social circles. At this stage, they may begin crafting a version of events that protects their reputation and minimizes any damage to their self-esteem. Instead of presenting the relationship's full reality, they often highlight details that cast them in a favorable light while leaving out information that could reflect negatively on them. They may portray themselves as the victim, suggest that the other person was unstable or unreasonable, or claim that the relationship ended because they lost interest. These narratives serve a psychological purpose. They help reduce feelings of shame and preserve the image they want others to believe. The need to control the story can become intense because outside validation remains extremely important to them. Positive reactions from others provide reassurance that they are still admired, respected, or justified in their actions. They may seek sympathy, agreement, or public support to reinforce their preferred version of reality. In some cases, they become highly sensitive to criticism and may react strongly to anyone who questions their account. Protecting their image becomes a way of protecting their fragile self-concept, allowing them to avoid confronting painful emotions associated with rejection, accountability, and personal vulnerability. The fourth psychological stage is the search for replacement validation. After the shock, ego injury, and efforts to protect their image, many narcissistic individuals begin looking for new sources of attention, admiration, and emotional supply. This stage is often misunderstood because from the outside it can appear as though they have moved on quickly and are thriving. They may suddenly become very active on social media, spend more time socializing, start dating almost immediately, or showcase a seemingly exciting new chapter of their life. To observers, this can look like confidence and resilience, but the underlying motivation is often more complicated. For a narcissist, validation functions as a way to regulate self-esteem. When a significant relationship ends, the loss creates an uncomfortable void. The person who once provided attention, praise, emotional energy, or a sense of importance is no longer available. Rather than sitting with feelings of grief, rejection, or self-reflection, the narcissist may try to fill that void as quickly as possible. New people become sources of reassurance that they are still attractive, valuable, desired, or powerful. During this period, they may seek admiration with unusual intensity. Compliments, attention, romantic interest, and social approval can temporarily ease the discomfort created by the loss. However, because the underlying wound has not truly been addressed, the relief is often short-lived. The validation must be continually renewed, leading them to keep searching for additional sources of attention and affirmation. Their focus is frequently less about forming genuine emotional connections and more about restoring the damaged sense of self that emerged after the relationship ended. The pursuit of new admiration becomes an attempt to replace what was lost without confronting the deeper insecurities that the loss exposed. The fifth psychological stage is often referred to as hoovering, a term used to describe attempts to pull a former partner, friend, or source of validation back into the narcissist's orbit. This stage typically emerges after the narcissist realizes that new sources of attention are not providing the level of satisfaction, control, or emotional reassurance they expected. The loss continues to affect their sense of importance, and they begin looking back toward the person who once fulfilled those needs. Hoovering can take many forms, ranging from subtle and seemingly harmless to highly emotional and persuasive. A narcissist may send a casual message, react to old social media posts, bring up shared memories, offer compliments, or express concern about your well-being. In other cases, they may apologize, promise change, or claim they have finally recognized their mistakes. These actions can create confusion because they often appear sincere and heartfelt. The person on the receiving end may wonder whether the narcissist has genuinely changed or finally understands the damage that was caused. What makes this stage psychologically significant is that the primary motivation is frequently tied to restoring access rather than building a healthier relationship. The narcissist may be seeking reassurance that they still have influence, emotional impact, or a place in your life. Reestablishing contact can temporarily soothe feelings of rejection and restore a sense of control that was lost when the relationship ended. The effort is often strongest when they sense that you are healing, moving forward, or becoming emotionally independent. Your growth can serve as a reminder that they no longer occupy the central role they once held, creating a renewed desire to reinsert themselves into your emotional world and regain the validation they previously received. The sixth psychological stage often involves devaluation, resentment, or emotional detachment. This stage tends to emerge when the narcissist realizes that attempts to regain influence, validation, or access to the former relationship are no longer producing the desired results. Faced with the reality that the connection may truly be over, they must find a way to protect their self-image from the ongoing discomfort of rejection. Rather than fully processing the loss and accepting responsibility for their role in the relationship, they frequently shift their perception of the person who left. One common response is devaluation. The same person who was once praised, idealized, or presented as special may suddenly be described as difficult, selfish, ungrateful, or flawed. The narcissist begins focusing on negative qualities, exaggerating mistakes, and rewriting the history of the relationship in a way that justifies the separation. This psychological reframing helps reduce the sting of being left because it allows them to believe they did not lose someone valuable. If the other person can be viewed as inferior or problematic, the rejection feels less threatening to their ego. For some narcissists, resentment becomes a dominant emotion. They may hold grudges, speak negatively about the former partner, or remain preoccupied with the perceived insult to their pride long after the relationship has ended. Others move toward emotional detachment once they have secured sufficient validation elsewhere. In those cases, the focus shifts away from the past relationship and toward new opportunities for admiration and attention. Whether expressed through bitterness or apparent indifference, the underlying psychological goal remains the same: preserving a sense of self-worth while avoiding deeper feelings of vulnerability, accountability, and emotional loss that remain difficult for them to confront directly. The seventh psychological stage can be understood as lingering resentment and the need to preserve a wounded ego long after the relationship has ended. By this point, the narcissist may have accepted that they cannot easily regain the person they lost. But acceptance does not necessarily mean emotional resolution. Instead of processing the experience in a healthy and reflective way, they often continue to carry a sense of injury connected to the loss. What remains is not always love, attachment, or longing, but a persistent reaction to the fact that someone exercised the freedom to leave, reject, or distance themselves. During this stage, the narcissist may repeatedly revisit the story of the relationship, but through a lens that protects their self-image. They may tell themselves that they were mistreated, misunderstood, or unfairly abandoned. Even when significant time has passed, they can remain emotionally invested in proving that they were right and that the other person was wrong. This ongoing mental narrative serves as a defense against feelings of shame and inadequacy that were triggered by the loss. In some cases, resentment appears through criticism, gossip, passive-aggressive behavior, or attempts to undermine the former partner's reputation. In other cases, it is expressed more quietly through obsessive comparisons, private anger, or fantasies about being vindicated. The former partner becomes a symbol of an unresolved ego wound rather than simply a person from the past. Because the narcissist's self-esteem is often dependent on external validation, the memory of being left can continue to challenge their sense of importance. The emotional energy attached to that challenge may linger for years, especially if the former partner appears happy, successful, emotionally healthy, or completely unaffected by the narcissist's absence. The eighth psychological stage is often characterized by emotional replacement and the reconstruction of identity through new sources of validation. After moving through shock, ego injury, image management, hoovering attempts, and lingering resentment, many narcissistic individuals eventually focus their attention on rebuilding a sense of importance elsewhere. This does not necessarily mean they have healed from the loss or gained meaningful insight into their behavior. Instead, they often redirect their emotional energy toward people, environments, or achievements that help restore the admiration and recognition they crave. At this stage, the narcissist may become deeply invested in a new relationship, social circle, career success, or public image. These new sources of validation help reinforce the identity that was threatened when the previous relationship ended. The attention they receive can create the appearance of growth and recovery, but the underlying motivation is frequently centered on maintaining self-esteem rather than developing emotional self-awareness. The focus remains on finding external confirmation of worth instead of building an internal and stable sense of value because the original loss challenged their perception of themselves. They often seek situations that allow them to feel admired, desired, respected, or influential again. New achievements and relationships become evidence that they are still important and worthy of attention. However, if these sources fail to provide consistent validation, old insecurities can quickly resurface. The emotional stability gained through external admiration is often temporary because it depends on factors outside their control. As a result, the cycle of seeking recognition, approval, and reassurance may continue in different forms throughout their lives. The previous relationship becomes less important as a personal connection and more important as a chapter in a larger pattern of pursuing self-worth through the reactions and attention of others. As we've seen, the psychological journey a narcissist goes through after losing someone is rarely a straightforward experience of grief. It often unfolds through a series of reactions centered on shock, wounded ego, image protection, validation seeking, attempts to regain control, resentment, and eventually the search for new sources of admiration. While these stages may look different from one person to another, they often share a common theme: the struggle to cope with a loss that challenges their sense of identity and self-worth. But the most important takeaway isn't understanding what happens inside the mind of a narcissist after they lose you. The real takeaway is understanding what happens inside you after you choose to leave. Their reactions, their narratives, and their attempts to regain influence do not define your value. Your worth was never dependent on their approval, attention, or ability to recognize what you brought to the relationship. Healing begins when you stop measuring your progress by their behavior and start measuring it by your own growth. Every boundary you maintain, every moment of clarity you gain, and every step you take toward emotional freedom is evidence that you're reclaiming your life. The story doesn't end when a narcissist loses you. In many ways, that's where your new chapter begins, one built on self-respect, self-trust, and the freedom to create healthier relationships that are rooted in mutual care rather than control. Every boundary you hold becomes a wall they cannot climb, and every time you choose not to respond, you take back a piece of yourself they once controlled. The hardest part isn't leaving. The hardest part is staying gone when everything inside you questions that decision. But here is what you need to understand. The pull you feel isn't always love. Sometimes it is familiarity, sometimes it is guilt, and sometimes it is the remnants of a bond that was built on control rather than care. Recognizing the difference changes everything. When you stop waiting for them to understand what they did, you start giving yourself the understanding you always needed from them. That shift is quiet, but it is powerful. You stop looking over your shoulder, you stop checking their social media, you stop rehearsing conversations that will never happen the way you imagined them. And slowly, the version of you that survived the relationship begins to grow into the version of you that thrives beyond it. Healing does not happen in a straight line. Some days you feel strong and other days you question everything. That is normal. What matters is that you keep moving even when the steps feel small. The narcissist may continue their cycle with someone else. They may repeat the same patterns, seek the same validation, and move through the same stages with a new person. But their journey is no longer your concern. Your concern is the life you are building now, the peace you are creating, the relationships you are forming with people who value you without needing to control you. You may still encounter moments where doubt creeps in, a memory surfaces, a song plays, a familiar feeling returns, but those moments become shorter and less powerful over time. They lose their grip because you are no longer the same person who once needed their approval to feel whole. The most freeing realization is this: you were never the problem. You were simply the person who stayed long enough to see the pattern. And once you saw it, leaving became the only logical choice. Your story does not end with their reaction to your departure. Your story continues with every choice you make to prioritize your own well-being. Every morning you wake up without anxiety. Every night you go to bed without walking on eggshells. Every conversation where you speak freely without fear of being judged, dismissed, or manipulated. That is what freedom looks like. Not loud or dramatic. Quiet and steady, built one day at a time. The narcissist will move on. They always do. But you are not moving on from them. You are moving toward yourself, and that direction makes all the difference.